Oh, you gotta love it in the morning, the smell of diesel and AFCAT. Oh, those were the days. And we only knew it, didn't we, Steve? But occasionally, the civvies were allowed to come on board and have a walk around and... What can I say? Do you miss those days?
Do I miss the days of sniffing the AVCAT and the diesel and all the rest of it with the screws going and the Olympus gas turbines firing up? Or do I miss the civvies coming on board?
Both.
I must admit, I do miss the sleek grey warrior of death as both those Olympus engines were fired up and we kicked in. Do I miss the civvies coming on board? No, not really. No, I don't miss that at all.
Did you never stand at the bottom of the ladders when the ladies were coming down?
I would never have done such a thing, Mark.
You did, I could tell by
Only if I were wearing a peaked cap so that my eyes were shielded and my head was bowed.
Anti-flash.
And had my anti-flash on. I had my S6 or S10 respirator or whatever number they were up to back in the day. So we're talking about Navy days, really, aren't we? Or family days or Navy days, because they were different, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. Anyway, first of all, how are you?
Oh, yeah, who are you? Who am I? How are you? Yeah, how are you anyway?
Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you very much. I can see the end of the tunnel of winter. I'm sat here in a hoodie, freezing, but it must be cold for you down there.
It is very cold for me down here. I've got my heater going above my head, so my head is very hot, but everything below the neckline is cold. And yeah, it's blooming cold. We had the coldest day on record down in not far from where I live.
What was that?
It was like -1 or something. Well, it's nothing like my lounge. I mean, my lounge is -2. They need to come and start measuring it in my lounge, for goodness sake.
You'd think you being a warm body would actually raise the temperature, but obviously not.
Oh, clearly not. I don't have enough hot air, Mark.
I'm not answering that one. Anyway, Navy days. And you're absolutely correct. I hadn't thought about it. Family days as well. Do you remember anything about Navy days? Because 40-odd years ago now.
Very little, and I think that in the years that I was in, I only actually got involved in one Navy day, and I think that was in Portsmouth. It certainly wasn't in Guz, it wasn't in Plymouth, and I think the only one I got involved in was down in Pompey, and all I can remember from it is that we ended up having to spend days and days and days cleaning the flipping ship so it looked absolutely spotless for civvies to come in and wander all over the place. And obviously where we worked as well, in the MCO, the main communications office, they weren't allowed in there anyway. So, yes. You know, they weren't allowed into where you worked. They were very limited as to where they could go. There were certain areas that were completely off limits to them, which rightly so. But I don't have a massively good memory of Navy days at all, other than it was just a lot of work for Jolly Jack to sort out before these people came on board. I guess it was really good for the dockyards. I mean, the dockyard was pretty full. I remember the dockyards being absolutely chocker with people wandering around. And obviously, you'd have the ships that everybody would want to go on. Like the ship that you were on, probably, Mark, because they probably were aware that you were there, and it was just like pulling the crowds, right?
Carry on. We're talking about your experience.
No, that's my experience. That there were the sexy ships, and then there were the crappy Leanders.
Oh, that's what you're trying to reference, is it? Oh, yeah, okay. I was on the Brazen. That's a good ship. I'm like you. I only remember two. One, I can't remember the year. Must have been around about 84, possibly. Probably earlier. It was in Portsmouth. And it actually ended up being a beautiful day. But the lead up, terrible weather. And I was seconded to a tough-as-nails shippy where we had to get together the bunting in a building not far from the Victory. So every time
Explain what the bunting is for those non-flag waggers.
The flags. All the stuff that they would put up, like naval flags. And we were all stitching them on long kind of ropes which are going to go up somewhere. And it was all to decorate the dockyard and make it festive. Because fluttering flags tends to do that, doesn't it? But this guy was terrible to work for. He was absolutely pig ignorant. And he was very good at what he did. I can't remember his name, never came across him again. But he was hard work. Couldn't stand me, I don't think. I was a young lad, and he didn't quite get the youth, despite the fact he would have been young himself once. But when I came out that building, you got to see what was happening in the dockyard. And I think I once came across a video on YouTube showing it. So hundreds, if thousands of people turned up for the days. It was a lot of activity. We were in just the white tops, nothing else, and the hats. And that's kind of what I remember.
Yeah. It was much the same for me. As I say, the amount of foot traffic through the dockyard was massive. I can remember being stood on the flight deck and just looking out, because often you'd have a number of the ships that were berthed alongside one another, wouldn't you? So you could go from one and then you could go to the next and then you could go to the next. So they were just connected by the gangways. But I can remember being stood on the flight deck just looking out across might even have been one of the dry docks actually, just watching people just milling around and looking at all of these other ships that were in. And it was absolutely chocker of people. I think one of the carriers was in as well. And I can't remember if that would have been the Hermes or maybe the Illustrious. Can't remember. But she had a huge queue going up the gangway to try and get on board of civvies that were just absolutely itching to get on there and have a look around. But, it's obviously always nice to show people around and fly the flag and do all of that sort of thing. But it was a hell of a lot of work. I found it was a hell of a lot of work to prep for it, and there wasn't a lot of payback for yourself.
The second one I had, I can't remember if I was in the Navy or just came out, because I went around with my future wife's family, and it was Plymouth. And there weren't many ships. We were quite disappointed with the amount that were there, but there was one, the RFA Argus, and that was a ship that was purchased for the Falklands to do with, I think, casualties. So it was an old, unusually shaped merchant vessel, long kind of middle and flight deck, and then this huge superstructure at the front. And I took on the family, and it was quite a steep gang way to get up there. And then really, steps after steps all the way up to the top. We saw the galley, we saw a few of the accommodation, because it was RFA. So each person on board got their own cabin. And then a massive bridge. But I felt at the time, this is not really the Navy. It's just a big ship, and it was the biggest ship there. So I don't know when that was. It probably was 86, 87.
I do recall, and the memory has triggered as you were speaking. I'd left the mob, and I was back down the south of England. I was down in Portsmouth, and I was working for the police, and I was on a job down there doing some work, and Navy Days was on in Portsmouth Dockyard. And so I'd managed to finish what I was doing a little bit sooner, and so I thought to myself, I'm going to go and have a look into the dockyard. I'm going to wander in, because I've been out of the mob for a few years. So I went wandering into the dockyard, and it just so happened that one of my old ships, HMS Manchester, was there. So I thought to myself, I'm going to go and have a look on HMS Manchester, and I'm going to have a check her out. So I go bimbling across the gangway and introduce myself and say, I used to serve on her years and years ago, and I've just come to have a look. And they're like, oh, all right, mate, yeah. I said, who's the skipper now? And they gave me his name, a guy called Al Halliday. And I said, Al Halliday? And he said, yeah, that's our skipper. And I said, flipping heck, he was a subby. He was a subby with me years ago. And so I left them my card to say, give us a shout if you're ever around, skipper, and we'll have a catch-up. He was a really nice chap, actually, really nice young fella. Obviously had matured considerably in the years that I'd left the mob and had got his own command. But yeah, Manchester, he was the captain.
Did he catch up?
So never caught up with him. And I was on a job, so I was whisked away quite swiftly. But it was really interesting. It was really interesting going back on as a civvy.
Did you feel the same? That it was slightly alien, or?
Yeah, she wasn't my ship.
Yeah,
she wasn't my ship. And I think that's the same whenever you go on another ship that's not yours.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's just not quite the same, is it? It's just not quite the same. And having left the Manchester, gosh, it must have been probably 10 years previously. She just wasn't my ship. And the sailors weren't my weren't my crew. Nothing wrong with them, good lads, all the rest of it, but not my ship, not my crew. Not my circus, not my monkeys.
It is odd, though, because I remember doing that in Gibraltar. I was on the Aurora.
Yeah.
It would have been very early on, 82. And a guy who I'd gone through training with, Dave Greenslade, he was on the Rill. And he invited me on. Of course, that was an old ship.
You are showing your age now, Mark, on the Rill.
Yeah.
Goodness me.
Of course, an unusual galley, I remember, where, the mess, the dining area. And I didn't feel as though I was in the Navy. It was like, I'm an alien here. I'm not, I don't belong here. It's very bizarre. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, it is. It is definitely strange. I guess it's like you don't cross the same river twice, right?
No.
And
it's not Heraclitus.
There you go. I like to chuck a bit of stuff in there, Mark. You've got to keep the punters
happy. Cross it, get it right.
Yeah, well, okay. I've got to mix it up a bit. I don't want you to get it all. I don't want to get it all right, do I? But I don't want you to cast. I don't need to cast nasturtiums on my character.
Nasturtiums? No, not at all. No daffodil. But a different thing was bring family on board.
Yeah, it was very much.
I've got more to say about that one.
Go on, tell us a little bit about your family. I was going to say family exposure, but that's probably not the right word.
Well, it was on the Charybdis, and I brought Joe down to the mess.
Yes.
And we were all trying not to swear. And I think we even got away with it for about most of the visit. She came in, we sat them around, and everyone was very polite and, teas and calls. And I think someone said the C word in the background, and we were saying, do apologise. Of course, Joe didn't care. But afterwards, she said the smell was terrible. It was diesel, it was aftershave, it was all that kind of stuff, paint, she reckons. But she said a very interesting thing. I think I've talked to you about this. All the guys that she was talking to seemed to, from her perspective, including myself, come from broken backgrounds. Talked about that before, haven't we?
We have.
So if we found it alien going on to another ship, Civvies must have. Yeah,
they must. I've never really spoken to anybody in depth about it. My brother I spoke to because he came down for the family days, and we also did sea days, so we also went out to sea with him on. That was on the Cherry Bee. It might have been before you came on board, actually, before you joined the Cherry Bee, but we did a family day and we did a sea day with them. So they all came on, and then we shot out to sea, had a little thrash around, and then came back. And I found it really amusing because my brother, who, bless him, love him to bits, he's super good at everything. He's the sort of bloke who just makes you sick because whatever he turns his hand to, he does it well and better than anybody who's trained in it for a million years type of thing. So he's a very capable, very competent guy. And he has no sea legs. So he was as sick as a pig on this ship, and I'm like, yes, finally, I found something that I can do better than you. I can go to sea better than you. But that was good. That was good. He didn't enjoy it. He did not enjoy being at sea on the warship. It was not his thing.
I did it on the Brazen. We came back. It was my final deployment, the one I talked about, going to Malta. And a mate of mine from Leicester came down, and Joe was there, and her mum and dad. And there's a picture of me. I was bronzed, I looked like a god. And
and then you got your head out.
It all went downhill from that moment, believe me. But I looked at the dog's bees, and we took them out to the Sound. Well, Joe was literally sick before we even left the side. She hated it, and it was really calm, beautiful summer's day. But bless the Navy for doing that. They didn't have to do that kind of stuff. We were away for a long time, and they take families out for little jollies.
No, it was great. It was really good. I enjoyed being able to show, because my folks came down, my brother, my sister, etc. A number of the family members came down, and it was really good just to show them where I'd been. We'd not long deployed to the Gulf, come back from the Gulf, so I'd been away for months and months, and they'd got to see where I was living and working all the time that I was out there in the Persian Gulf. And they were horrified, I think. They were completely horrified about what we lived in, how we lived, how we did things. But, it doesn't seem abnormal. When you go on there, I mean, you get on board, don't you? And you very quickly you adapt to your surroundings, and very quickly you you get into the run of the way things operate, and not being able to put your pit down until the last person's gone to bed from the mess square because you've got the middle gulch in the centre of the mess square, and you've got to wait until everybody gets off your pit so you'll be able to go to bed. And yeah, everything just becomes normal, just normal. The smell of paint everywhere, the smell of diesel everywhere, the smell of been stinking beer everywhere, the smell of foofs and foo-foo dust and all the other stuff that gets slapped around before people go ashore. It just becomes very natural. It's those sorts of smells that when you pick them up again, it takes you right back.
Yes. Oh, especially talcum powder. I don't think I've ever used talcum powder since I left the Navy, but everyone had talcum powder.
Well, you'd cover your pit in it, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Yeah, odd things.
I don't know. Yeah, when you were down the Gulf and it was really flipping hot, you would, and I don't know if you used to do this, but we certainly used to do this, you would unzip your sleeping bag and you would line it full of foo-foo dust, talcum powder, and then you'd line the talcum powder in your sleeping bag.
Because it's
now I'm not 100. Yeah, that's right, and that was all the time. So it's probably very, very good for you.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Yeah, not exactly, right? Not exactly. There's been 60,000 million people now with emphysema from talcum powder. But there you go.
I assume they still have Navy days.
Got no idea. I've got absolutely no idea. Do they actually have any ships still?
Well, that's what I'm asking. Let's have a look. Plymouth Armed Forces Day will return on Saturday the 29th of June 2024, so it's passed, on Plymouth Hoe. So that's it. They don't seem to have Navy days, so someone's going to tell us if that's the case.
Would you like to go to one? If you were down in Pompey and there was a Navy day on, would you go?
Possibly. There's going to be a period in time where I'd like to go back into the dockyard just to see it. And the new ships, see what they're like. Because I think they're going to be completely different to when we were out. They were getting bigger and more accommodation, better accommodation. So I remember, I think we said this before, they did a defence review sometimes in the early 80s that said, possibly earlier than that, they're no longer going to build destroyers because they can't afford it. So they built destroyers and called them frigates.
I know.
So they just became bigger. Brazen, the 42s, what you were on.
Yep.
So yeah, I'd like to see the new ones.
I think I'd like to go back. I'd like to go back and have a look. I'd love to go back out to sea on a warship. I would really like to go back out to sea on a warship.
Where though? What, to jib?
Spend a bit of time on it, just watching what goes on, and that'd be really cool. I'd like to do that.
So if the powers of be that listening, there you go. There's your opportunity. Invite us.
Here's my opportunity. Invite us on board. Couple of old Matellows.
I'm sure I'd be seasick.
Yeah, that would be embarrassing, wouldn't it? That
So
would be
Navy
very
days,
embarrassing.
and the families coming on board. It definitely certain members, mainly for the families coming on board, because I think there was more of a motivation to do well, if that makes sense.
Of course it does. You needed to show your best for your family, didn't you? You were there to show them and make them proud. Making them proud of what you've achieved and what you've done. And let's face it, it was getting into the mob when we got in. And I'm presuming it was the same for you. They weren't taking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. There was actually a selection process that you had to go through. You didn't just walk up. Sure? You weren't just press ganged by Andrew Miller and his oppos. You did actually have to go through a process. I can remember going through this process and being told that I was going to be accepted because I was only 15 at the time. And the petty officer who came and saw me, he said, right, he says, yeah, you passed, you've done it well. He says, you are certainly, not the sharpest tool in the drawer, but I think you've got potential, and so I'm going to invest in you. And he said, but if you let me down, I'm going to drop you like an hot brick. I said, yeah, okay, fair enough. Thanks, petty officer.
How'd that pan out?
Well, look at me now. Look at the dizzy heights that I arrived at.
It was the best decision they made, Steve.
It was the finest decision the Royal Navy ever made. Ever made to recruit me. Yes, something like that.
Do you think you get in now?
No, probably not. I'm not clever enough. You probably got to have a degree or something silly to get in now. I don't know.
Well, there's a lot more kind of technology to deal with.
Mm.
Although we were part of that anyway, so
We were like the Pathfinders, you and I, Mark. That's what we were.
mm.
We set the standard which none have been able to follow and beat.
I don't know why I'm thinking of Dungeons and Dragons.
No, mate, I don't know.
So Navy days, I got fun memories, but I can't remember much of them, I must admit. And like you say, it was a lot of hard work, and especially for the dockyards, the amount of work that civvies and Navy and Marines used to go through to get ready, and of course, make people happy. It was a great way of selling the fleet to the youngsters and stuff like that. And I'd like to think that they're still going, but with the way things have been in recent years, I'm not too sure.
No, very different era, mate. Very different era. Excellent.
All right, then, mate.
Well, thank you.
I'll see you again. Take care, sir.
You look after yourself. Slip and proceed.
Yes, bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bravo Zulu.